They say time heals all wounds. But what they don't tell you is how long it takes to stop feeling the knife twist when you remember the moment your entire world shattered into a million pieces. For me, that moment came on an ordinary Tuesday evening at Bistrot Pierre, as I watched my husband of 8 years kiss another woman's hand, the same hands that had helped me plan our anniversary dinner he'd conveniently forgotten. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Rebecca Martinez, and this is how I discovered that my life was built on a perfect lie. I should have known something was wrong when David didn't respond to any of my messages that morning. 8 years of marriage, and he'd never forgotten. Our anniversary, not once. But there I was, sitting at my desk at Denver General Hospital, staring at my unanswered texts while trying to focus on patient charts. Earth to Rebecca. Emma, my fellow pediatric surgeon, waved her hand in front of my face. That chart isn't going to fill itself out by telepathy. I forced a smile, tucking a strand of dark hair behind my ear. Sorry, just distracted. David hasn't said anything about our anniversary plans tonight, not even a text. Emma's perfectly shaped eyebrows furrowed. That's not like him. Mr. Always has a grand gesture himself? She was right. David Cooper, hotshot investment banker and my husband of 8 years, was known for his flair for the dramatic. Our past anniversaries had included everything from surprise trips to Paris to elaborate scavenger hunts across the city. This silence was unusual. Maybe he's planning something big? Emma suggested, but her tone betrayed her doubt. I nodded, trying to convince myself more than her. Probably. I should focus on work anyway. I have that complicated spinal surgery at 2. The hours crawled by, each passing minute making my stomach twist a little tighter. By 6 o'clock, I'd finally received a message from David. Meet me at UBC, Le Bistrot Pierre at 7:30. Sorry for the radio silence. Crazy day at work. Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by embarrassment at having worried so much. Of course he hadn't forgotten. This was David we were talking about. I rushed. Home to change, slipping into the emerald green dress he'd bought me last Christmas. The one he said made my eyes sparkle. A spritz of his favorite perfume, a touch of lipstick, and I was ready to celebrate 8 years with the man I loved. Le Bistrot Pierre was one of Denver's most exclusive French restaurants, housed in a converted Victorian mansion in Cherry Creek. As I handed my keys to the valet, I couldn't help but smile. Maybe he was planning another trip to Paris? The maitre d' led me to a private dining room in the back of the restaurant. My heart skipped a beat when I saw David standing there in his perfectly tailored gray suit. But it wasn't just him. There was a woman with him, tall, blonde, and wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Rebecca! David's voice carried across the room, but something was off. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Come meet Caroline. I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the hardwood floors. Each step felt like walking through molasses. Caroline. This is Rebecca, David said, his hand resting on the small of the blonde's back in a gesture so familiar it made my blood run cold. Rebecca, this is Caroline Matthews, my fiance. The world stopped spinning. I heard the words, but they didn't make sense. Fiance? But I was his wife. I was wearing his ring. We had anniversary plans. We had a life. I don't understand, I managed to say, my voice sounding distant and strange to my own ears. Caroline's perfect features arranged themselves into what I suppose was meant to be a sympathetic expression. Oh, David, you didn't tell her yet? Her voice dripped with false concern. Tell me what? The words came out sharper than I intended. David straightened his tie, a nervous habit I'd always found endearing before. Now it made me want to scream. Rebecca, I've been meaning to have this conversation for a while. Caroline and we've been seeing each other for the past year. I was going to tell you after the merger was complete, but then Caroline's father accelerated the timeline. Her father? My voice cracked. Robert Matthews, David said, as if that explained everything. And in a way, it did. Robert Matthews owned half of downtown Denver and had connections throughout the banking world. The merger David had been working on for months. It was with Matthews Financial. So that's what this is about? I laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. You're trading me in for a better business deal? Don't be crude, Rebecca, David snapped, his carefully maintained facade cracking for a moment. These things happen. People grow apart. Caroline and I, we understand each other. We want the same things. And what about what we wanted? I gestured between us, my wedding ring catching the light. What about our anniversary? Did you really bring me here tonight, of all nights, to tell me this? A flicker of confusion crossed David's face. Anniversary? And that's when it hit me. He hadn't forgotten our anniversary. He'd erased it, along with every other memory, of our 8 years together. In his new narrative, those years were just a placeholder until something better came along. I looked at Caroline, really looked at her. She wasn't just younger and prettier. She was a stepping stone to everything. David had always wanted power, connections, status. I think I'm going to be sick, I muttered, turning toward the door. Rebecca, don't make a scene, David called after me, but I was already moving. Past the concerned faces of the waitstaff, past the curious glances of other diners, past the valet who was still holding my keys. I made it to my car before the tears started, but they weren't tears of sadness. As I gripped the steering wheel, watching David emerge from the restaurant with his arm around Caroline, I felt something else entirely. Rage. Because David Cooper had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He hadn't just betrayed me, he'd underestimated me. And that was going to cost him everything. The drive from Le Bistrot Pierre was a blur of streetlights and tears, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I barely registered the concerned look from the valet as he handed me my keys or the other cars on the road as I navigated through Denver's busy streets. My mind kept replaying the scene in infinite, torturous detail. David's smug smile, Caroline's perfectly manicured hand resting possessively on his arm, the weight of 8 years of marriage crumbling under the chandelier's pristine light. Something deep inside me, perhaps muscle memory or simple instinct, guided my car to the familiar parking lot behind Denver Memorial Hospital. It seemed fitting that I would end up here, in the place where I'd spent countless nights saving lives while my husband apparently planned to destroy mine. The towering structure of glass and steel had always been my sanctuary, a place where I knew exactly who I was and what I was meant to do. Now it stood as a silent witness to my unraveling, its windows reflecting the soft glow of emergency lights like countless watching eyes. The harsh glare of my phone screen pierced the darkness of my car for the 20th time that evening. David's name flashed across the top, accompanied by a message that made my blood boil. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Come home. We can discuss this like adults. The sheer audacity of his words sent a wave of hysterical laughter bubbling up from my chest, like adults, as if ambushing your wife with your new fiance on your anniversary was the pinnacle of mature behavior. As if 8 years of shared life could be dismissed over appetizers at an overpriced French restaurant. The dashboard clock glowed 11:47 p.m., each passing minute feeling like another nail in the coffin of my marriage. I watched as hospital staff changed shifts, their scrub-clad figures moving through the parking lot like ghosts, oblivious to the fact that my entire world had just imploded. How strange that life simply continued on, that surgeries were still being performed, that babies were still being born, while I sat here watching my life crumble through the windshield of my BMW. The car David had insisted I buy last year, probably already planning his exit strategy. Instead of responding, I did something that surprised even me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I called my mother-in-law, Patricia Cooper. Rebecca? Her voice was thick with sleep. Right. It was nearly midnight. Is everything okay? Did you know? The words came out before I could stop them. About Caroline Matthews? About what David was planning? The long pause told me everything. Oh, sweetheart, Patricia sighed. I tried to talk him out of it, told him to at least wait until after the holidays. I hung up. Of course she knew. Everyone probably knew except me, poor, naive Rebecca, too busy saving children's lives to notice her husband shopping for an upgrade. A tap on my window made me jump. I looked up to see Dr. Samantha Torres, my mentor from residency, peering in with concern. I'd forgotten she worked the night shift. Either you're extremely dedicated to checking on patients at midnight, she said when I rolled down the window, or something's very wrong. 20 minutes later, we sat in her office, the harsh fluorescent lights making everything feel surreal. I told her everything, the forgotten anniversary, the ambush at the restaurant, Caroline Matthews' perfect smile as she helped destroy my life. Sam listened without interrupting, her face growing stormy. When I finished, she opened her desk drawer and pulled out a business card. Maya Rodriguez, she said, sliding it across the desk. Best divorce attorney in Colorado. She handled my sister's divorce last year when that bastard Charles tried to hide his assets in crypto. I stared at the card. Divorce. The word felt foreign, wrong. I don't know if I'm ready for— Listen to me, Rebecca. Sam cut in, her voice gentle but firm. You're one of the best pediatric surgeons I've ever trained. You can reconstruct a child's spine with your eyes closed. But right now, you need to treat this like triage. Stop the bleeding before it kills you. What bleeding? The financial kind. Men like David, they don't just wake up one day and decide to trade in their wives. This has been planned, probably for months, which means he's had time to move assets, hide money. She was right. Even through my shock, I knew she was right. David wasn't just my husband. He was an investment banker who specialized in making money disappear and reappear where it was most advantageous. Maya has an emergency line, Sam continued. Call her. Tonight. Before David can— My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't David, but a news alert. Matthews Financial set to announce major merger. Sources say deal worth billions. Suddenly, everything clicked. The late nights at the office, the mysterious trips to New York, the way David had been. Obsessively checking the financial news for months, this wasn't just about Caroline. This was about her father's company, the merger David had been working on. He needed a clean break from me before the announcement went public. Rebecca? Sam's voice seemed to come from far away. What is it? I showed her the alert. He's not just leaving me for another woman. He's leaving me for a business deal. Sam's expression hardened. All the more reason to call Maya. Now. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number. A sleepy voice answered on the third ring. Maya Rodriguez. My name is Rebecca Cooper Martinez, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. My husband just announced his engagement to another woman at what was supposed to be our anniversary dinner. And I think he's trying to divorce me before a major business merger goes public. There was a pause, then, Dr. Torres told me about you. Pediatric surgeon, right? Specialized in spinal reconstruction? Yes, but good. You're detail-oriented, methodical, used to working under pressure. We're going to need all of that. Papers rustled in the background. Tell me everything, starting with when you first noticed changes in his behavior. As I began to speak, I caught my reflection in Sam's office window. In the harsh hospital lights, I barely recognized myself. The woman in the emerald dress, David's favorite, looked like a stranger. Good. Because the Rebecca who had walked into Le Bistrot Pierre tonight, expecting a romantic anniversary dinner, was dead. And the woman who walked out, the one who'd soon be meeting with Maya Rodriguez at 7 a.m., she was someone else entirely, someone David Cooper was about to wish he'd never underestimated. The morning after the restaurant disaster dawned with a clarity that felt almost offensive. Sunlight streamed through the windows of my temporary apartment, a modest studio I'd reserved months ago when I first noticed the subtle shifts in David's behavior. Call it intuition or paranoia, but something in my gut had told me to prepare for the worst. Now, as I sat at the small IKEA desk that served as my command center, that same instinct was screaming that there was more to this story than a simple affair. Maya Rodriguez's office occupied the entire top floor of a sleek downtown building, the kind of place that screamed serious money without being ostentatious. The attorney herself matched her surroundings, elegant but sharp, like a blade wrapped in silk. She didn't waste time with small talk, launching straight into action the moment I settled into one of her leather chairs. "Your husband's trying to rush this divorce through before the Matthews merger goes public," she stated, spreading various documents across her desk. "The question is, why the hurry? The business world already knows he's with Caroline Matthews. It was hardly a secret in their circles. So what's the real deadline he's racing against?" The question hit me like a physical force, stirring something in my memory. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through years of photos until I found what I was looking for. A picture from 2 years ago at the annual charity gala for Denver's financial elite. In the background, barely noticeable, David stood in deep conversation with Robert Matthews. "This was 2 years ago," I said slowly, handing Maya my phone. Long before the merger talks supposedly began. They knew each other already. Maya's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly as she examined the photo. "And look who else is in the frame," she murmured, zooming in on a figure I hadn't noticed. Catherine Preston, widow of the late CEO of Preston Financial, David's former client that had mysteriously gone bankrupt. She stood apart from the crowd, her expression unreadable as she watched David and Matthews. The next 4 hours disappeared into a maze of financial records, old newspaper articles, and social media deep dives. Maya's team worked with surgical precision, building a timeline that grew more disturbing with each new piece of information. Preston Financial's collapse hadn't been a simple case of bad investments as David had claimed. The company had been systematically gutted from the inside, its assets stripped and redistributed through a complex web of shell companies. And at the center of it all, a recurring pattern. Wherever Preston lost money, Matthews Financial seemed to gain it. "Your husband's good," Maya admitted, studying a particularly complex flow chart one of her associates had created. He covered his tracks well, but he made one crucial mistake. She looked up at me, a predatory smile playing at her lips. He forgot about the human element. People talk, especially when they feel betrayed, and I'm willing to bet Catherine Preston has quite a story to tell. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk about David and what really happened to James Preston. Meet me at the Denver Botanic Gardens tomorrow, noon. Come alone." The message was signed simply KP. Maya's expression turned serious when I showed her the text. "This is bigger than a divorce case now," she warned. "If what we're suspecting is true, if David helped Matthews orchestrate Preston Financial's downfall, we're looking at serious financial fraud, the kind of thing that makes the FBI very interested." The weight of what we were uncovering settled over me like a heavy cloak. This wasn't just about David leaving me for a younger woman. This was about power, money, and possibly something far more sinister. I thought about James Preston, who'd supposedly taken his own life after his company's collapse. Had it really been suicide, Or was there more to that story, too? I need to meet with Catherine, I decided, even as Maya began to protest. But I won't go in blind. I pulled out my own notebook, the one where I'd been documenting every suspicious call, every late night at the office, every unexplained business trip for the past 6 months. David thinks he's the only one who knows how to keep records. The rest of the afternoon passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Maya's team helped me gather every scrap of potentially relevant information from my years with David. Bank statements, tax returns, event photographs, even old holiday cards. Anything that might connect the dots between Preston Financial's collapse and the current Matthews merger. As the sun began to set over downtown Denver, Maya walked me to my car, her heels, clicking purposefully against the parking garage concrete. "Remember," she said, her voice low and intense, "when you meet Catherine tomorrow, you're not just gathering ammunition for a divorce. You're potentially building a case for federal prosecution. Every detail matters." I nodded, my mind already racing ahead to tomorrow's meeting. "David always said I was too detail-oriented," I replied, a bitter smile playing at my lips. "Too focused on the small things. Funny how that might be his undoing." That night, in my temporary apartment, I spread everything out on the floor, a twisted tapestry of my life with David. Photos, documents, timeline notes, all connected with red string like something from a crime show. In the center, I placed 3 items: a photograph of David with Robert Matthews from that charity gala, a news clipping about James Preston's death, and my wedding ring. The ring caught the lamplight, throwing scattered reflections across my makeshift evidence board. 8 years of marriage, reduced to a piece of evidence in what was quickly becoming something far larger than a divorce case. I thought about Caroline Matthews, about her practiced smile and perfectly manicured hands. Did she know what she was really getting involved with? Or was she just another pawn in whatever game David and her father were playing? Tomorrow at noon, I would meet Catherine Preston and maybe finally understand the true scope of David's betrayal. But as I stared at the web of evidence surrounding me, one thing became crystal clear. This wasn't just about saving myself anymore. This was about justice, about uncovering a truth that had already destroyed one family and might destroy more if left buried. I picked up my phone and sent Maya one final text for the night. "I'm ready for whatever we find tomorrow, no matter how ugly it gets." Her response came immediately. "Remember, you're not just fighting for yourself now. You're fighting for every person they've hurt. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we go to war." The Denver Botanic Gardens looked almost ethereal in the early morning light, frost crystallizing on the Japanese maples and late-blooming chrysanthemums. I'd arrived 2 hours early for my meeting with Catherine Preston, drawn to the place where I'd first noticed something was wrong with my marriage exactly 1 year ago. It had been during the annual fall fundraiser, where Denver's elite gathered to pretend they cared about environmental conservation while really networking over overpriced champagne. I remembered standing by the koi pond, watching David charm a group of investors with his usual practiced ease. That's when Robert Matthews had appeared, pulling David aside for what looked like an intense conversation. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. David was always networking, always chasing the next big deal. But now, reviewing the memory with fresh eyes, I noticed details I'd missed. The way Matthews had gripped David's arm just a little too tightly, the flash of something like fear across my husband's face before his professional mask slipped back into place. Caroline had been there too, I realized with a start. Not by David's side. She'd been standing near the orchid display, pretending to admire the flowers while watching their conversation with careful intensity. How long had they been planning this? How many events had I attended, playing the role of devoted wife while they orchestrated my replacement? The memory shifted, pulling me further back in time to the first signs that something was changing. It had started small. David installing advanced security on his home office computer, claiming it was company policy. Late-night phone calls, that he'd taken the garage, new passwords on accounts that had always been shared. But the real red flag had come 6 months ago, during what should have been a routine dinner with the Prestons. Catherine Preston had hosted it at her new home, a modest but elegant townhouse, a far cry from the mansion she'd lost after her husband's death. I remembered how she'd watched David throughout the evening with an unreadable expression, how her hand had trembled slightly when he'd mentioned Robert Matthews' name. At the time, I'd attributed it to grief, to the painful reminder of her husband's suicide and their company's collapse. Now I wondered if it had been rage. The memory of that evening unfolded like a film reel in my mind. Catherine had pulled me aside as we were leaving, ostensibly to show me her garden. "Your husband," she'd said, her voice carefully neutral. "He's working on the Matthews merger, isn't he?" When I'd confirmed it, her expression had flickered for just a moment. "Be careful, Rebecca. Numbers don't lie, but the people who control them do." I hadn't understood her warning then. Or maybe I hadn't wanted to understand. It was easier to focus on my surgical practice, on the children whose lives I could actually save, than to examine the growing distance in my marriage too closely. Different memories surfaced. David's reaction when I'd mentioned taking a position as head of pediatric surgery at Denver Presbyterian. It would have meant a significant pay raise, more prestige, but also more scrutiny of our finances for the hospital. Board review. He'd talked me out of it, suggesting I stay at Denver Memorial where I was comfortable. Had that been part of his plan too? Keeping me safely contained where I couldn't accidentally stumble across whatever he was doing with Matthews Financial? The pattern became clearer as I traced back through the years. David had always encouraged my career, as long as it didn't intersect with his world. He'd supported my ambitions, as long as they didn't require too much of his transparency. Even our social life had been carefully segregated, charity events and dinner parties with his banking colleagues, separate from my hospital fundraisers and medical conferences. I'd thought it was just the natural division between our professional lives. Now I realized it had been strategic. Every decision, every suggestion, every gentle nudge away from certain paths, all of it designed to keep me in the dark about his true activities. The realization made me physically ill. I found a bench near the Japanese garden and sat down, trying to steady my breathing. A groundskeeper gave me a concerned look as he passed by, probably wondering why someone was having an existential crisis among the bonsai trees at 10 a.m. But the memories kept coming, pieces falling into place with devastating clarity. 3 years ago, David had insisted we revise our prenuptial agreement, claiming his firm required it for some new investment structure. The documents had been complex, full of financial jargon I hadn't fully understood. I'd trusted him to explain it fairly. Had that been when he'd started planning his exit strategy? 2 years ago, he'd suggested I keep my maiden name professionally, arguing it would be better for my independent medical career. I'd agreed, touched by what I thought was his support for my professional identity. Now I wondered if he'd been protecting his own name, ensuring that when everything fell apart, my reputation wouldn't taint his. Even the house we'd bought in Cherry Creek, he'd insisted on keeping it in his name only, citing some complex tax advantage. I'd been too busy with my residency to question it deeply. Every decision, every financial arrangement had been carefully orchestrated to minimize my claim on his assets. The sound of footsteps on gravel pulled me from my reverie. I looked up, expecting to see Catherine Preston arriving early. Instead, I found myself staring at an elderly man in an immaculate suit, someone I recognized from countless charity events but had never actually spoken to. "Dr. Martinez," he said, using my maiden name with pointed precision. "I believe you're here to meet Catherine Preston. She sends her regrets. She won't be able to make it." He held up a hand before I could protest. "But she did ask me to give you this." He handed me a thick manila envelope. "I'm Andrew Thorne, by the way. I was James Preston's personal attorney, and I've been waiting a very long time for someone to start asking the right questions." The conference room at Maya Rodriguez's law office had transformed into something resembling a war room. Documents from Andrew Thorne's manila envelope covered every surface: financial statements, internal memos, and most damning of all, a series of emails that James Preston had apparently forwarded to his attorney just days before his death. But it was the photographs that held my attention. Grainy surveillance shots showing David and Robert Matthews meeting with various people in locations across Europe and Asia, all dated months before Preston Financial's collapse. Maya paced the room, her designer heels silent on the plush carpet. "This is bigger than we thought," she said, pausing to examine a particularly complex flowchart. Preston wasn't just bankrupted, he was systematically destroyed. And the same pattern is starting to emerge with other companies that competed with Matthews Financial. Andrew Thorne sat at the head of the table, his weathered hands folded neatly in front of him. "James knew something was wrong months before the end," he explained, his voice carrying the weight of long-held guilt. He noticed discrepancies in their international accounts, trades that didn't quite add up. But every time he tried to investigate, the evidence would vanish. The old attorney pulled out another document, this one yellowed with age. What really concerned him was this: a pattern of similar accidents happening to other financial firms that got in Matthews' way. Companies that had been stable for generations suddenly collapsing, CEOs dying in convenient accidents or committing suicide under suspicious circumstances. I felt a chill run down my spine as I examined the list. 10 companies over 15 years, all competitors to Matthews Financial, all destroyed through seemingly unrelated circumstances. And David? Where does he fit into this? "Your husband," Thorne said, the word dripping with disdain, "was Robert Matthews' golden boy, the perfect combination of charm and ruthlessness. He could walk into a company as a consultant, gain their trust, and identify their weaknesses. Matthews would then exploit those weaknesses through a network of shell companies and strategic market manipulation." Maya's team had been working through the night, cross-referencing data and building connections. One of her associates, a former SEC investigator named Rachel Chen, pulled up a digital presentation on the wall screen. "Look at this pattern," she said, highlighting a series of transactions. Every time Preston Financial made a significant trade, there was a corresponding movement in accounts registered to offshore companies, the same companies that later ended up acquiring Preston's assets at pennies on the dollar. "And now they're doing it again," I murmured, seeing the bigger picture. "The Matthews merger isn't really a merger at all, is it? It's an acquisition campaign. They're targeting every major financial firm in Denver," Thorne nodded grimly. "With the Preston template as their blueprint, but this time they're moving faster, more aggressively. They've learned from their previous operations." A knock at the door interrupted us. Maya's assistant entered carrying a tablet. "You need to see this," she said, pulling up a news website. The headline made my blood run cold. "Breaking. SEC launches investigation into multiple Denver financial firms." "It's starting," Thorne said quietly. "Matthews is making his move, using the SEC investigation as cover to devalue his targets before swooping in to save them." Maya swore under her breath, then turned to me. "This changes everything. We're not just building a divorce case anymore. Thus, we're potentially looking at one of the biggest financial fraud schemes in Colorado history." I stared at the evidence surrounding us. Years of careful planning and manipulation laid bare in paper and pixels. "We need to move fast," I said, my medical training kicking in. Like treating a patient in critical condition, timing would be everything. But we also need to be surgical about this. One wrong move and they'll bury everything. Rachel Chen pointed to another document, this one showing a series of upcoming social events. "The Denver Financial Summit is next week. Every major player in the industry will be there, including the SEC investigators. Matthews is probably planning to use it as a platform to announce his next moves. And David and Caroline's engagement, I added, the pieces clicking into place. A public show of unity between the families right before they start absorbing their competitors. It's all about optics. Maya's predatory smile returned. Then that's where we make our stand. But we need to be smart about this. They've spent years building this house of cards. We need to find the perfect pressure point to make it all collapse. Thorne pulled out one final document from his briefcase. A handwritten letter from James Preston dated the day before his death. James left us a roadmap, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He knew they were coming for him, knew he wouldn't be able to stop them directly. So he left breadcrumbs, hoping someone would eventually follow them. As I read the letter, I felt a strange connection to a man I'd never really known. Like me, he'd discovered a betrayal that went far deeper than he'd imagined. Unlike me, he hadn't lived to expose it. I have a suggestion, Rachel said, pulling up another file. David's not the only one with access to international banking networks. I still have contacts from my SEC days, people who monitor suspicious financial activity across borders. If we can track the money flow from the Preston collapse, we might be able to prove the pattern, Maya finished. Show that it wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger criminal enterprise. I thought about David, about how confident he'd been at the restaurant, how certain that I would simply accept my dismissal and fade away quietly. He'd forgotten that the same attention to detail that made me a successful surgeon could be turned to other purposes. We have 6 days until the summit, I said, standing to examine the evidence wall we'd created. Let's make them count. The private dining room at the Capitol Grill buzzed with quiet conversation as I sat across from Judge Margaret Chen, mother of my colleague Dr. Marcus Chen, and one of the most respected figures in Colorado's judicial system. She stirred her tea with deliberate precision, absorbing everything we'd just shared about David, Matthew's financial, and the Preston collapse. Maya sat beside me, while Andrew Thorne's presence at the end of the table lent gravity to our impromptu war council. What you're suggesting, Judge Chen said finally, her voice measured, is that this goes beyond white-collar crime into potential criminal conspiracy, including the suspicious death of James Preston. She set her spoon down with a quiet clink. And you believe David Cooper and Robert Matthews have engineered similar accidents for other business rivals? I slid across the forensic accounting reports Rachel had compiled, showing the pattern of financial devastation that followed in Matthews' financials' wake. The judge studied them with the same intensity I'd seen her son display in complex surgeries. The resemblance was striking. Both possessed that rare ability to find crucial details others might miss. Your theory is compelling, she admitted, but proving it will be extraordinarily difficult. These men have friends in high places, influence in every major institution in Colorado. You'll need more than circumstantial evidence and financial irregularities. Maya leaned forward, her voice low despite our private setting. That's why we need your help, Your Honor. We're not just building a case, we're building a network. People who've been watching from the sidelines, suspecting something was wrong but never having enough proof to act. Judge Chen's eyes narrowed. Thoughtfully. Like Catherine Preston. She turned to me. Did you know she clerked for me years ago, before she married James? Brilliant woman. She's been trying to prove Matthew's involvement in her husband's death for 2 years, but kept hitting walls. This was news to me. I'd known Catherine primarily as James Preston's widow, a familiar face at charity events. The idea that she had a legal background, connections to Judge Chen, it added another layer to our growing coalition. There's more, Thorne interjected, pulling out his tablet. I've been in contact with former employees of the other companies. Matthews absorbed. People who noticed similar patterns but were silenced through legal threats or financial pressure. They're willing to talk now, if we can protect them. Judge Chen nodded slowly. I may be able to help with that. I still have contacts in the federal judiciary. If we can convince them this is part of a larger RICO case. She paused, considering. But you'll need someone on the inside. Someone close to Matthews who can verify the pattern. Caroline, I said suddenly, remembering something from the restaurant confrontation. She knows something's wrong. I saw it in her eyes when David was talking about the merger. She's not just a trophy fiancé, she's a Stanford MBA. She would have recognized the signs. Maya's expression turned calculating. Can you reach out to her? I shook my head. Not directly, but I pulled out my phone, scrolling through old photos until I found what I was looking for. Her younger sister, Emma, was one of my patients. 3 years ago. Complex spinal surgery, full recovery. Their mother still sends me Christmas cards. Judge Chen's eyes lit up with approval. A personal connection, untraceable to the current situation. That could work. The next hour was spent building our strategy. Judge Chen made calls to trusted colleagues in the federal court system. Maya coordinated with Rachel to compile evidence packages for potential whistleblowers. Thorne worked on establishing secure communications channels for our growing network of allies. As our meeting wound down, Judge Chen pulled me aside. There's someone else you should meet, she said quietly. Elizabeth Warner. She was general counsel for Meridian Capital before Matthews Financial absorbed them 5 years ago. She's been gathering evidence ever since, waiting for the right moment. Where is she now? Teaching business law at Colorado State. Keeping a low profile. The judge wrote an address on a napkin. Go see her tomorrow, but be careful. The last person who tried to connect these dots ended up dead in what looked like a hiking accident. I pocketed the napkin, thinking about James Preston and all the others who'd tried to stand against Matthews's empire. What made you decide to help us? I asked suddenly. You're taking a huge risk. Judge Chen's expression hardened. Because 20 years ago, I watched Robert Matthews destroy my best friend's law firm through similar tactics. By the time I pieced it together, it was too late. The statute of limitations had expired. She squeezed my arm gently. This may be our last chance to stop him. Back at my temporary apartment, I created a secure digital folder combining all our new information. Judge Chen's federal contacts, potential whistleblowers, Elizabeth Warner's existence, each piece strengthening our position. But it was the personal connections that gave me hope. Every person Matthews had wronged left behind a network of friends, family, and colleagues who remembered the truth. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Meeting set with Elizabeth Warner tomorrow, 2 p.m. Her students are on fall break. Campus will be quiet. Rachel will accompany you as backup. I sent back a quick acknowledgement, then noticed another message, this one from an unknown number. I know what they did to James. Meet me at the Denver Art Museum, Thursday, 7 p.m. Come alone. See Caroline. It had to be. The timing was perfect. 2 days before the financial summit, enough time to incorporate any new information into our plans. But Judge Chen's warning about the hiking accident echoed in my mind. I forwarded the text to Maya, adding, could be a trap. Could be our smoking gun. Thoughts? Her response came quickly. Take the meeting, but you won't be alone. I'm calling in a favor from an old friend at the FBI's white-collar crime division. We'll have eyes on you the entire time. As I prepared, for bed, my medical pager buzzed. A reminder of the life I'd lived before uncovering this conspiracy. Emergency spinal surgery, pediatric trauma. For a moment, I was tempted to ignore it, to stay focused on our investigation. But as I grabbed my keys and hospital ID, I realized something important. Every surgery I performed, every child I helped, strengthened my credibility as a witness. I wasn't just David Cooper's discarded wife anymore. I was Dr. Rebecca Martinez, pediatric surgeon, respected professional, and now the center of a growing coalition of people determined to expose the truth. Matthews and David had built their empire on destroying people. We would bring it down by bringing those people together. Colorado State University's business school stood eerily quiet during fall break, our footsteps echoing through empty hallways as Rachel Chen and I followed a student volunteer to Professor Elizabeth Warner's office. The professor herself cut an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of penetrating gaze that could make corporate executives squirm in their ergonomic chairs. "I've been expecting someone to connect these dots," she said, bypassing introductions as she ushered us into her office. But instead of sitting behind her desk, she led us through a door I'd initially mistaken for a closet. Beyond it lay a research room with walls covered in photos, documents, and red string. An analog version of the evidence board in my apartment, but spanning decades. "Welcome to 20 years of Robert Matthews' greatest hits," Warner said, gesturing at the display. "Every company he's destroyed, every life he's ruined, every accident that conveniently removed obstacles from his path." She pointed to a photo I didn't recognize. "Including my brother Thomas, former CEO of Meridian Capital. Official cause of death? Single car accident on a clear day? Actual cause. Brake lines mysteriously failed right before he was scheduled to testify about irregular trading patterns." Rachel moved closer to examine a complex diagram. "These shell companies, they're not just for hiding money, are they? They're staging areas." Warner nodded approvingly. "Matthews doesn't just destroy companies, he harvests them. Every bankruptcy, every collapse, feeds resources into his network. Patents, proprietary technology, key personnel, all absorbed into seemingly unrelated entities that eventually feed back to Matthews Financial." She pulled down a thick folder. But James Preston almost exposed the pattern. He'd started documenting everything, building a case. That's why they had to move quickly with him. She glanced at me. "Just like they're moving quickly now with this merger wave. Your husband's public betrayal wasn't just personal cruelty, it was a signal to their network. The end game is starting." My phone buzzed, a text from Maya. "FBI contact confirms Caroline's art museum meeting is real. She came alone, no security. Tale. Looks legitimate." Warner saw the message. "Caroline Matthews," she mused. "Now there's an interesting player. Did you know she has a PhD in game theory from Stanford? Wrote her dissertation on predicting market manipulation through behavioral patterns." This stopped me cold. "She's not just Robert Matthews' daughter or David's new fiance. She's been studying their methodology," Rachel finished. "Question is, as an ally or an apprentice?" Warner moved to her computer, pulling up a database. "After Thomas died, I created this, tracking every major financial play Matthews has made, every company he's targeted. There's always a pattern. First, create internal instability through leaked information or manufactured scandals. Then, manipulate stock prices through coordinated trading by shell companies. Finally, swoop in as the savior during the crisis." She typed rapidly, bringing up current market data. "Look at what's happening right now in Denver's financial sector. 3 major firms showing identical patterns of stock volatility. Internal memos about possible irregularities mysteriously leaking to regulators. Key executives suddenly facing personal scandals. The same playbook," I murmured. "But faster, more aggressive. Because they're not just taking down one company. This time," Warner said grimly, "they're going for complete control of Denver's financial sector. The SEC investigation, the merger announcements, your husband's public drama. It's all theater, designed to create the perfect storm of instability." Rachel's phone chimed with an alert. She checked it, her expression turning serious. "Speaking of theater, David just announced a press conference for tomorrow morning. Topic: concerning revelations about industry irregularities. He's going to throw someone under the bus," Warner said immediately. "Create a scapegoat to distract from the larger pattern. Standard Matthews tactics. Sacrifice a pawn to protect the king." I thought about Caroline's museum meeting, now just hours away. Unless, what if that's what they want us to think? What if David's press conference is the distraction from something else? Warner's eyes lit up with academic interest. Go on. Every other time Matthews has done this, it's followed the same pattern, right? But patterns can be used against you. If Caroline really has been studying their methodology, she might be setting up a counterplay, Rachel finished, using their own tactics against them. Warner moved to another section of her evidence wall, pulling down a series of photographs. Look at these. Every major Matthews operation had the same key players. Robert Matthews as the strategic mind, a charming front man to handle public relations, and a numbers person to manage the technical details. Like David, Caroline, and... I prompted. That's just it. They're missing their numbers person for this operation. The last one, Victor Chen, no relation to your friend Rachel, died in a convenient boating accident 3 months ago. Rachel was already pulling up data on her tablet, which means they're vulnerable on the technical side. If we could get access to their trading algorithms, we'd have proof of market manipulation, Warner finished. But those algorithms would be protected behind layers of security. You'd need someone with inside access to their system. I stared at Caroline's text message again, remembering her Stanford credentials. Maybe that's what tomorrow's meeting is really about. Warner began gathering specific documents from her collection. Take these. They show the technical patterns from previous Matthews operations. If Caroline really is planning something, she'll need to know she's not alone. As we prepared to leave, Warner caught my arm. One more thing. After Thomas died, I found this in his personal files. She handed me a small notebook. It's encoded, but I recognize some of the references to Matthews's operation. I could never crack the full system, but maybe with your medical background. I opened the notebook, seeing what looked like patient notes. These are medical shorthand abbreviations, but used oddly. Thomas was dating a doctor when he died, Warner explained. I always wondered if she helped him create this system. If you could decode it. Another piece of the puzzle, another potential ally in our growing network. As Rachel and I left the campus, my phone buzzed with an update from Maya. Elizabeth Warner's brother's autopsy records just became available. Judge Chen expedited the request. You need to see these. The game was becoming clearer, but so were the stakes. Tomorrow's museum meeting wasn't just about gathering evidence. It was about choosing sides in a battle that had already claimed too many lives. The Denver Art Museum's modernist architecture cast strange shadows in the evening light as I approached the designated meeting spot. Maya's FBI contact, Agent Sarah Keller, had swept the area thoroughly before giving me the green light. Now, wearing a nearly invisible earpiece and carrying a panic button disguised as a tube of lipstick, I felt more like a spy than a surgeon. Target approaching from the west entrance, Agent Keller's voice whispered in my ear. Alone, as promised. No surveillance detected. Caroline Matthews looked different away from the restaurant's soft lighting. Sharper, more focused, her designer outfit replaced by practical dark clothing. She carried a leather messenger bag that looked too heavy for its size. Thank you for coming, she said, sitting beside me on the bench. Without preamble, she pulled a laptop from her bag. We have approximately 17 minutes before my father's security team realizes I've slipped my tail. Here's what you need to know. The laptop screen displayed a complex series of algorithms, familiar enough from Warner's research to recognize their significance, but with crucial differences. These are the trading patterns my father and David used to destroy Preston Financial, Caroline explained, her fingers flying over the keyboard. But look at the underlying code structure. I studied the screen, remembering Warner's words about Caroline's game theory expertise. These aren't just algorithms for market manipulation, I realized. They're designed to be traceable, once you know what to look for. A tight smile played at Caroline's lips. My dissertation wasn't just academic research. I spent 5 years studying my father's methodology, building a model to predict and document his patterns. James Preston wasn't just David's victim. He was my test case. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You've been gathering evidence against your own father? All this time? Since I was 16, she said quietly. Since I found out what really happened to my mother. She pulled up another file, a death certificate I recognized from Warner's research. Claire Matthews died in a hiking accident 12 years ago. Except my mother was terrified of heights and never went hiking alone. Agent Keller's voice crackled in my ear. Movement at the north entrance. Security team approaching. Caroline must have spotted them too. She quickly transferred files to a secure drive. I don't have time to explain everything, but understand this. The merger announcement at the financial summit isn't what you think. David's press conference tomorrow is meant to implicate Jensen Capital in a scandal, creating a distraction from the real play, which is a complete takeover of Colorado's banking sector. My father's been positioning for this for decades. David's just the latest frontman, charming, ambitious, and ultimately disposable. She handed me the drive. Everything you need is here. Trading algorithms, shell company structures, evidence of market manipulation going back 20 years. But it's not enough. What do you mean? These are patterns, not proof. We need something concrete. Documentation of actual trades, internal communications. She checked her phone, grimacing. Which is where tomorrow's press conference comes in. While David's making his accusations, my father's team will be destroying evidence, cleaning house before the SEC investigation goes deeper. Unless someone could access their systems during the chaos, I said, understanding dawning. Caroline nodded. The press conference is at 10 a.m. By 10:15, every reporter in Denver will be focused on Jensen Capital. Meanwhile, Matthews Financial's downtown offices will be operating on skeleton staff, everyone at the press conference for appearances. Creating a window of opportunity. Exactly. But we'd need someone with direct access to their internal network. Someone they'd never suspect. She gave me a meaningful look. David's wife, I breathed. I still have building access. My credentials were never revoked. Because my father convinced David you weren't a threat. Just another discarded trophy. Wife too broken to fight back. Her smile turned predatory. Men like them never expect their victims to work together. Agent Keller's urgent whisper. Security team, 30 seconds out. Wrap it up. Caroline stood, shouldering her bag. Tomorrow morning, 9:45 a.m. I'll create a distraction at the press conference. You'll have maybe 20 minutes before someone realizes something's wrong. She handed me a key card. Server room, sub-level 3. Everything you need to know is on the drive. Why are you doing this? I asked as she turned to leave. Why now? She paused, her expression hardening. Because men like my father and David, they don't just destroy companies. They destroy families, lives, entire communities. My mother tried to stop him alone and paid with her life. James tried to fight alone and lost everything. But we're not alone anymore. As she disappeared into the growing darkness, Agent Keller materialized beside me. We got all that on video, combined with Warner's research and Judge Chen's warrants. It won't matter without the internal documentation, I said, clutching the drive. We need actual proof of illegal trades. You're not seriously considering breaking into Matthews Financial? That's not just dangerous, it's illegal. Not if we have a federal warrant. I pulled out my phone, dialing Maya. How quickly can Judge Chen process an emergency application for electronic surveillance? We have new evidence suggesting imminent destruction of documents relevant to an ongoing SEC investigation. The next hour was a blur of activity. Maya's office became a command center, with Rachel analyzing Caroline's algorithms while Warner cross-referenced them against her historical data. Judge Chen worked her connections, expediting warrant applications through the federal system. Timing has to be perfect, Maya said as we finalized our plan. The moment David starts his press conference, our team moves in with the warrants. Any earlier, and they'll have time to react. Any later, and the evidence might be gone. I studied the building schematics Caroline had provided, memorizing access routes and security patrol patterns. What if it's a trap? What if Caroline's working with them? Warner shook her head. The algorithms check out. These are genuine Matthews financial trading patterns, documented over years. The level of detail, the historical correlations. This is someone who's been planning this for a long time. Besides, Rachel added, we've got confirmation on her mother's death. Claire Matthews was investigating irregular trades at the family company right before her accident. The pattern fits. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Tomorrow, 9:45 a.m., be ready. The security cameras in sub-level 3 will experience a technical glitch lasting exactly 20 minutes. Make them count. I showed the message to Maya, who forwarded it to her FBI contact. Agent Keller's team will be in position, she confirmed. The moment we have probable cause, they move in with the warrants. As midnight approached, I found myself back in my temporary apartment, studying Caroline's files. The trading algorithms were beautiful in their complexity and terrifying in their implications. This wasn't just about money or power. This was about control, about reshaping entire financial systems to benefit a select few. Tomorrow, we would have one chance to expose everything. One chance to prove that even the most carefully constructed empires could fall when their victims decided to fight back. Dawn broke over Denver with an unseasonable chill, the October air sharp enough to make my fingers tingle as I parked 3 blocks from Matthews Financial headquarters. The coffee shop where I'd agreed to meet Agent Keller was already busy with early morning commuters, none of them aware that they were about to witness one of the biggest financial scandals in Colorado history. Final equipment check, Keller said quietly, sliding into the booth across from me. She looked like any other businesswoman in her crisp suit, but the intensity in her eyes betrayed her FBI training. From her briefcase, she pulled out what looked like an ordinary smartphone. This has been modified to copy server data automatically once you plug it into any USB port. You'll have exactly 18 minutes before the backup security protocols kick in. I checked. My watch, 8:30 a.m. In less than 2 hours, everything would change. Maya had positioned her legal team at strategic locations throughout downtown, ready to move the moment we had evidence. Judge Chen had 3 different federal judges on standby for emergency warrants. Even Rachel and Warner had roles to play, monitoring financial data in real time for any sign that Matthews was moving assets. There's something else you should know, Keller said, her voice dropping even lower. We found a connection between Victor Chen's boating accident and a shell company registered to one of Matthews' subsidiaries. The same company made a large payment to a private security firm 2 days before Chen died. My blood ran cold. You think they're planning something similar for Caroline? We think they already tried. Her car's brake lines were tampered with yesterday. Fortunately, she was paranoid enough to check before driving. Keller's expression hardened. These people don't leave loose ends, Dr. Martinez. Once you access those servers, there's no going back. At 9:15 a.m., I received the first text from Caroline. Press conference location changed to Matthews Financial Lobby. Father insisted. Wants to project image of corporate unity. Changes nothing. Security still diverted. Be ready. The change of venue was concerning, but it also meant David and Matthews would be even further from the server room when I made my move. I checked my reflection in the coffee shop window, adjusting my business attire, chosen specifically to blend in with the downtown crowd. The ID badge Caroline had provided was an exact replica of current employee credentials, complete with the new security watermarks. Teams in position, Keller confirmed, touching her earpiece. FBI surveillance has eyes on all building exits. Local police have been advised of potential evidence destruction, standing by for warrant execution. My phone buzzed again. Maya this time. Elizabeth Warner just called. She decoded more of Thomas's notebook. Found references to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Names match shell companies from Caroline's data. It's all connected. At 9:30, I began my approach to Matthews Financial. The 60-story glass tower had always intimidated me during charity events, but now its imposing architecture felt appropriate, a physical manifestation of the power structure we were trying to dismantle. The lobby was already filling with reporters and financial industry figures, all gathering for David's press conference. I spotted him near the entrance, looking perfectly composed in an expensive suit, Caroline at his side playing the dutiful fiancé. Only someone who knew what to look for would notice the tension in her posture, the way her hand gripped her tablet just a little too tightly. Using the service entrance Caroline had identified, I slipped into the building's back corridors. My credentials worked perfectly at every checkpoint, Matthew's hubris in never revoking my access working in our favor. The security guards barely glanced at my ID, too focused on the growing media circus in the lobby. At 9:43, I reached sublevel 3. The keycard Caroline provided gave me access to a maintenance corridor that led directly to the server room. Through my earpiece, I could hear the beginning of the press conference above, David's voice echoing through the building's PA system as he began his carefully orchestrated performance. "This is a difficult day for Denver's financial community," he was saying, his voice carrying that perfect mix of concern and authority that had once made me trust him completely. "What we've uncovered at Jensen Capital represents a betrayal of public trust." At exactly 9:45, the security cameras in the corridor went dark, right on schedule. I swiped the final keycard, and the server room door clicked open. The vast array of computers hummed with power, each rack containing potential evidence of decades of financial manipulation. I had just plugged in Keller's modified phone when another sound caught my attention. Footsteps in the corridor outside. Heavy footsteps, multiple sets, moving with purpose. "We have movement," Keller's voice crackled in my ear. "3 armed security personnel headed your way. Get out now." But the file transfer had barely started. 18 minutes, Keller had said. We needed at least 15 for enough evidence to secure the warrants. I looked around frantically for another exit. Above, David was still speaking. "The integrity of our financial systems depends on transparency, on accountability." The footsteps were getting closer. My heart pounded as I watched the progress. Bar on the phone's screen, only 23% complete. Through my earpiece, I could hear Keller coordinating with her teams, trying to create a distraction upstairs to buy me more time. That's when I noticed something odd about the server configurations. The rack I'd chosen was labeled differently from the others. Legacy. Systems Archive. Next to it, a more current system marked Active Trading Protocols. "Dr. Martinez," Warner's voice cut through my earpiece. The notebook, Thomas's references to parallel processing, weren't about computers. They were about parallel records. Look for a secondary system. I quickly moved the phone to the other server rack. Immediately, the transfer speed doubled. Whatever Caroline's father was trying to hide, it was in the active systems, not the archives. The footsteps stopped outside the door. I heard the beep of a keycard, then another. They were trying to override the security lockdown. 40 seconds to file transfer completion, Keller updated. FBI teams moving into position. Through the PA system, David's voice had taken on a more aggressive tone, which is why we've worked closely with federal investigators to expose the full scope of Jensen Capital's illegal activities. The door mechanism whirred as security protocols engaged in a battle of electronic warfare. Caroline's override fighting against the guards' attempts to enter. The progress bar crept toward completion. 89%, 92%, 95%. A loud bang echoed. Through the corridor, they were trying to force the door. Above, David's voice reached its crescendo. "We must hold accountable those who would abuse the public's trust." The progress bar hit 100% just as the door burst open. 3 security. Guards rushed in, weapons drawn, only to find an empty room. The ceiling panel above the server rack settled silently back into place as I crawled through the maintenance shaft Caroline had marked on her blueprints. Transfer complete, I whispered into my comm unit. Initiating distribution protocol. Within seconds, the evidence was being uploaded to secure servers across the country. Maya's team would have their warrants within minutes. The FBI would move in before Matthews could destroy any more evidence. As I emerged from the building through a service exit, I heard David's voice one final time, which is why we are committed to full cooperation with all investigating authorities. I allowed myself a small smile at the irony. For once, David Cooper was telling the truth. He just didn't know it yet. The Matthews financial lobby erupted into chaos exactly 4 minutes after I transmitted the server data. I watched it unfold from a secure location across the street, where Agent Keller had set up her command center in an empty office suite. On multiple screens, we could see FBI teams entering the building while David was still at the podium, his practiced speech about Jensen Capital's corruption dying in his throat as federal agents approached the stage. Robert Matthews, the lead agent announced, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. We have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of securities fraud, market manipulation, and conspiracy to commit murder. The assembled reporters, already primed for a scandal, exploded into action. Camera flashes strobed across the lobby as Matthews was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of cold fury. David stood frozen at the podium, watching his carefully constructed world crumble in real time. But it was Caroline's reaction that caught my attention. While everyone else stared at Matthews' arrest, she was rapidly typing on her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen with urgent purpose. She's activating the failsafe, Rachel's voice came through my earpiece. Multiple trading algorithms just went live. They're trying to dump assets before the accounts can be frozen. Warner's voice cut in. Not dumping, transferring. Look at the patterns. These trades are reversing years of fraudulent transactions, creating a digital paper trail back to the original victims. On the financial terminals, numbers scrolled at dizzying speeds. Stock prices plummeted as hidden accounts suddenly became visible. Years of carefully concealed market manipulation, exposed in minutes through Caroline's countermeasures. Dr. Martinez, Agent Keller called me over to her main screen. You need to see this. The display showed security footage from Matthews Financial's executive floor. David, having fled the lobby chaos, was frantically shredding documents in his office, but he wasn't alone. A familiar figure stood in his doorway, Patricia Cooper, my former mother-in-law. You promised this would never happen, she was saying, her voice clear through the FBI's audio feed. You promised James's evidence died with him. David spun to face her, his composure finally cracking. What are you talking about? Don't play. Dumb, David? I know you took files from my house after James died. Files he'd entrusted to me about Matthew's operations. Patricia's usually perfect posture was rigid with fury. My own brother, David. You helped Matthews destroy my brother's company, and I helped you cover it up because you swore it would protect our family. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Patricia Cooper was James Preston's sister. The connections ran deeper than any of us had imagined. Through my earpiece, I could hear Maya coordinating with her legal team. Judge Chen just signed off on additional warrants. We can move on the secondary targets now. On another screen, Caroline had positioned herself near the building's secondary exit, coordinating with FBI agents. Her tablet displayed a complex network of financial transactions, the entire Matthews empire mapped out in digital form. Target vehicles approaching from the south, Keller announced. Black SUVs, diplomatic plates. Looks like Matthews overseas. Partners trying to extract him. But they were too late. The FBI had already transferred Matthews to a secure vehicle. On the financial terminals, Caroline's algorithms continued their work, exposing decades of financial manipulation, companies that had been destroyed, lives that had been ruined, all documented in cold, hard data. David's voice drew my attention back to the executive floor footage. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he was telling Patricia, desperation creeping into his tone. "Matthews promised us protection. The merger was supposed to legitimize everything. By destroying 3 more companies?" Patricia's laugh was bitter. "By ruining more families like you ruined ours? James trusted me with those files to stop this from happening again, and I betrayed him. Just like you betrayed Rebecca." A commotion in the lobby interrupted their confrontation. FBI agents were now moving through the executive floor, securing evidence and detaining key personnel. Through the glass walls, I could see David realizing he was trapped. Mrs. Cooper, an FBI agent, approached Patricia. "We'll need you to come with us. Your testimony about the Preston files could be crucial." As they led Patricia away, David made one last desperate move. He pulled out his phone, presumably to trigger some final failsafe. But nothing happened. "Looking for this?" Caroline's voice came from his doorway. She held up her tablet, showing a screen full of error messages. "I locked you out of the system an hour ago. Every override code, every emergency protocol. They're all sending data straight to the FBI now." David's face contorted with rage. "You played me." "No, David. You played yourself." Caroline's smile was cold. "Did you really think my father would trust someone like you with real power? You were always just another disposable asset. Like all the others." The FBI agents moved in, reading David his rights as they handcuffed him. Through the glass walls, I could see other agents leading away Matthews' financial executives in similar fashion. The empire was crumbling in real time. "Dr. Martinez," Agent Keller called me over again. "There's something else you should see." She pulled up a document on her screen. A death certificate for Claire Matthews, Caroline's mother. But this version was different from the one in Warner's research. This one showed evidence of toxicology results that had been suppressed. Proof that her hiking accident had been carefully staged. "Found this in the server data you extracted," Keller explained, along with evidence linking Matthews to at least 6 other accidents involving people who threatened to expose his operations. The scope of what we'd uncovered was staggering. This wasn't just about financial fraud anymore. This was about decades of orchestrated destruction, about lives ended or ruined to protect an empire built on lies. As I watched David being led away in handcuffs, our eyes met through the glass. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd married, charming, ambitious, seemingly perfect. Then it was gone, replaced by the truth I now knew. He'd been a fraud from the beginning, a willing participant in a system that destroyed lives for profit. Caroline approached me, her tablet still displaying the ongoing financial chaos her algorithms had unleashed. "Thank you," she said simply, "for trusting me when you had every reason not to." I thought about all the victims: James Preston, Claire Matthews, Thomas Warner, Victor Chen, and countless others whose lives had been destroyed by Matthews's empire. "We all had someone to avenge," I replied. On the screens around us, the financial world was realigning itself as the truth emerged. Stock prices adjusted, hidden, accounts surfaced, and decades of manipulation became clear for all to see. The house of cards was finally falling. 1 year after the collapse of Matthews Financial, I stood in front of the restored Preston building in downtown Denver. The autumn air carried the same crisp chill as the day everything had fallen apart. But this time it felt like renewal rather than ending. The building's new tenant, a nonprofit foundation dedicated to financial industry reform, seemed a fitting tribute to James Preston's memory. Catherine Preston stood beside me, her posture relaxed in a way I'd never seen during the Matthews era. As the foundation's executive director, She'd spent the past year helping to rebuild what Matthews and David had destroyed. "Hard to believe it's been a year," she mused, watching employees enter the building. "Sometimes I still expect to wake up and find it was all a dream." But it wasn't a dream. The evidence we'd uncovered had led to over 30 criminal indictments, including Robert Matthews, David, and several high-ranking executives. The trial had dominated headlines for months, exposing decades of financial manipulation and criminal conspiracy. David had eventually turned state's evidence, hoping for a lighter sentence, but the extent of his involvement had ensured he'd still spend at least 15 years in federal prison. My phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. "Just landed in Geneva. Meeting with EU financial regulators in an hour. They're implementing new algorithms based on our detection models. Father's international network is unraveling fast." Caroline had emerged as an unlikely hero in the aftermath, her years of secret documentation proving crucial in dismantling Matthews' global operations. She now worked with regulatory agencies worldwide, using her intimate knowledge of financial fraud to prevent similar schemes. The irony of Matthews' daughter becoming a champion of reform wasn't lost on anyone. "Dr. Martinez?" a voice called from the building entrance. Elizabeth Warner waved me inside, where she was conducting a training session for new financial oversight specialists. After years of documenting Matthews' crimes in secret, she'd finally found her true calling: teaching others to recognize and prevent financial fraud. The conference room was packed with eager faces, many of them former employees of companies Matthews had destroyed. They'd come from across the country to learn, to understand, and to ensure history wouldn't repeat itself. I spotted Patricia Cooper among them, her testimony about James Preston's hidden files having earned her immunity in exchange for becoming a fraud prevention educator. "Our guest speaker today," Warner announced, "is someone who helped expose one of the largest financial fraud schemes in Colorado history. But more importantly, she's someone who reminded us that the truth cannot be buried forever." As I took the podium, I saw Maya Rodriguez slip into the back of the room. Her law firm had grown exponentially since the Matthews case, specializing in representing whistleblowers and fraud victims. Judge Chen's daughter had recently joined the practice, creating a powerhouse legal team dedicated to corporate accountability. "When people ask me how it all came together," I began, "they're usually looking for technical details. They want to know about the servers, the algorithms, the paper trails. But the real story isn't about technology or finance. It's about people. People who refused to stay silent, who chose to fight back instead of giving up." Through the window, I could see Agent Keller's FBI team conducting interviews at a nearby coffee shop. They were building cases against Matthews' international associates, the web of corruption still unraveling a year later. Rachel Chen had joined their forensic accounting division, her experience with the Matthews case proving invaluable in tracking hidden assets. "The system only works when we believe the lies it tells us," I continued. "When we accept that power is untouchable, that money can erase truth, that fighting back is hopeless. But every system, no matter how carefully constructed, has a weakness. Sometimes that weakness is simply the assumption that their victims will remain victims forever." After the presentation, I had lunch with Catherine in what used to be Matthews Financial's executive dining room. The space had been converted into a public cafe, its former exclusivity replaced by open access and transparency. "James would have loved this," Catherine said, gesturing at the diverse crowd of people sharing tables and ideas. This was always his vision: finance serving people, not exploiting them. My phone buzzed again, a news alert this time. Another, Matthews' associate had been indicted, this one in Singapore. The dominoes were still falling, each revelation leading to new investigations, new recoveries of stolen assets. "How's the surgical practice?" Catherine asked as we finished our meal. "Busier than ever," I replied. The publicity from the Matthews case had actually helped my career, bringing attention to our pediatric spinal surgery program. We'd recently opened a foundation to help families afford complex procedures, funded in part by recovered Matthews assets. Later that evening, I visited David in prison. Not out of sentiment or forgiveness, but because the FBI needed clarification on some of his earlier testimony. He'd aged dramatically in just 1 year, his formerly perfect appearance now, haggard and worn. "I never thought it would end like this," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Matthews promised us we were untouchable." "That was your mistake," I replied, gathering my papers, believing that anything is untouchable. As I drove home to my new apartment, in Washington Park, I reflected on how much had changed in a year. The divorce settlement, augmented by recovered assets, had left me financially secure. But more importantly, it had left me free. Free from lies, from manipulation, from the gilded cage I hadn't even realized I was living in. My last stop of the day was Denver Memorial Hospital, where I had an evening surgery scheduled. As I scrubbed in, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who had walked into Bistrot Pierre that fateful night, expecting an anniversary dinner and finding betrayal instead. She was stronger now, wiser, but also more compassionate. She understood that healing came in many forms, sometimes through medical procedures, sometimes through exposing truth, sometimes through helping others find justice. The operating room awaited, its familiar environment a reminder that while some parts of my life had changed dramatically, others had remained steadfast. I had always been a healer at heart. The Matthews case had simply shown me that healing could extend beyond the operating room, that sometimes the most important surgeries involved cutting away lies to expose truth. As I prepared to begin the procedure, I smiled behind my surgical mask. David had wanted to write the ending to our story, but he'd forgotten one crucial detail. Every ending is just another beginning in disguise. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.